I see some people already attending.
Hello, welcome everyone to our Managing Sea Level Rise and Flooding in Miami-Dade County interactive session and dialogue. My name is Tiffany Troxler. I'm Associate Professor in Earth and Environment Department and Director of Science for the Sea Level Solutions Center. And we just wanted to welcome you. And today's program is presented by the Sea Level Solutions Center and the Institute of Environment and the Department of Journalism and Media at Florida International University in partnership with the City of North Miami. And the program was made possible by a grant from the Miami-Dade County Environmental Education Program, which the purpose is to increase awareness and knowledge about environmental issues and enhance critical thinking and problem solving to make informed decisions and take responsible actions. So I want to thank you all very much for joining today. We hope you enjoy the program, and Madi will start us off with a short poll.
Hi everyone, my name is Maria del Mar Trejos. I'm also part of Sea Level Solutions Center. So we're going to go ahead and get you started with a quick poll. You should be seeing it on your screen now. The first question says, I am a non-student or student. This is a single choice response, so you can go ahead and click on the right answer, and that should allow your poll to start working. So you can scroll the way down and you're going to see 6 questions. So I'll guide you through these, but let's go ahead and get some of those first question answered. The second question you should be seeing on your screen is the type of business where I work is private sector, government, nonprofit, self-employed, or you're not working. So you're going to have a couple minutes to answer this poll. Go ahead and click on the right answer for you. The third question I'm seeing is, what are the 3 most important things that determine your quality of life? This is a multiple response question, so you can select all that apply to you. We have health, family and friends, happiness, freedom, learning and education, religion, being outdoors, connecting with nature, work-life balance, safety or security, and a good pay or job. If you have any difficulties whatsoever at any point with IT or the polls, you're welcome to use our chat feature. You can ask us any questions there at any point. And if you want to ask questions to our panelists, we recommend you to use the Q&A feature where they can go ahead and answer those questions directly to you, or we'll try to get to those during our discussion in Q&A. So the fourth question we have here is, what are the 3 most important concerns you have about sea level rise and flooding? Again, this is a multiple choice, so select all that apply to you. We have a couple minutes to answer this. The first answer choice I'm seeing is applying science to make good decisions to address these issues, increasing threat from storm surge, impacts to property or property value, impacts on community, friends and family, lack of awareness and no action to address it, impacts to natural habitats and wildlife, exacerbation of social inequities, relocation, water contamination and public health impacts, impacts to infrastructure. We have 2 more questions. The 5th question is, what are the 3 most important concerns you have about other impacts of climate change? Apply those that seem right to you. And we're going to go ahead and go over these to see what this group thinks. The last question I have is, what do you think are the 3 highest priority initiatives or actions that can be done to reduce the impacts of climate change and improve your quality of life? Also, multiple response or multiple choice, so apply all that seem right to you. I have about 56% of you have voted. Let's try to get to a 75%. Hopefully we have the majority. And there's no right or wrong answer here. So we just want to know what you're thinking. All right, I'm going to give you 1 more minute to answer these. Right, seems like most of you have answered. Let's see if we can get to a higher number. All right, well, I'm gonna go ahead and end the poll and let's take a look at some of our results. All right, most of us are not students. 64% of you are not students. 41% of you work in government and 27% in the private sector. The 3 most important things that determine your quality of life to this group, 86% of you answered health, 55% of you said being outdoors and connecting with nature, and 27%, or 50% also said family and friends. And the 3 most important concerns you have about sea level rise and flooding, 64% of you said applying to science to make good decisions to address these issues. 55% of you said water contamination and public health impacts and impacts to infrastructure. And the 3 most important concerns you have about other impacts of climate change is more intense storms and impacts of natural habitat and wildlife and lack of awareness and no action to address it. And the 3 highest priority initiatives or actions that can be done to reduce impacts of climate change and improve your quality of life, 68% of you said increasing use of renewable energy, 50% said update codes, planning, and infrastructure based on best available science, and another 50% said increasing city or community green infrastructure initiatives like tree planting, vegetating swells, and increased restoration of coastal habitats. So with that being said, thank you so much for all those who participated.
Great, thank you, Madi. Okay, so let's get started with our first presentation. So we are delighted today to have Dr. Jantha Obasekera, Director and Research Professor in the Sea Level Solutions Center in the Institute of Environment at FIU. Thank you, Dr. Obi.
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Perfectly.
Give me 1 second to share this right screen. Can you see my screen?
Yeah, but can you put it on the...
It's not full screen
There you
yet?
go. That's
Okay.
good.
Okay, good. Let me get rid of all these other things. All right, good Monday afternoon, everyone. So I have very short time. I've never given a 10-minute talk on this topic, but I will try. I'm going to talk about sea level rise and some basic concept of flooding for what we're going to be discussing later. And as Tiffany mentioned, I'm with the Sea Level Solutions Center in the Institute of Environment. Anyway, if you have any comments or questions, we can discuss later. So I want to start out with explaining what causes sea level to rise. And there are a couple of factors that we need to consider. One is what is the global sea level change? And the best way to look at is if you see on the left-hand side, this little bathtub. If you see the ocean as a bathtub, there are 2 reasons why the ocean level or bathtub level will increase. One is obviously the thermal expansion. You know, as we know, the 93% of heat in the warming of the atmosphere is absorbed by the ocean. We know that from measurements. So when you warm something, you know, it expands. The other more important aspect for the future is, you know, we add water. How do you add water? You know, with the warming, you're going to be melting, particularly the land-based ice in places like Greenland and Antarctica. Believe it or not, Greenland has about 20 feet of ice. 20 feet of sea level rise in terms of ice. I heard today that, with the Arctic ice, which is different from land-based ice, we had the second lowest extent in that region. So there's something going on. And there is a lot of uncertainty in predicting that because the models are now very good. And the other way to get water into the ocean is from the melting glaciers. You've seen pictures of retreating glaciers. And finally, the land water storage. In other words, you build reservoirs or send a lot of water in terms of runoff into the ocean. So there is a mass balance aspect of it. What is the net water going into the ocean? So that defines the average sea level rise. But places like Miami-Dade County, there are some other things happening that affect the sea level rise rate. And globally, it's not uniform for multiple other reasons. You can see regional sea level factors here. On the rightmost part of this figure talks about ice mass redistribution effects. It's a little complicated, but if you look at all the ice coming off of Greenland and Antarctica, believe it or not, it's so much that it changes the gravitational field around the Earth. So it basically, the redistribution takes place throughout the globe, and near the ice sheets, it will basically, the sea level will drop. It's like a balloon, somewhere else it will go up. The other factor is the ocean circulation, like the Gulf Stream we have. It's predicted to slow down. When it slows down, the sea level will go up. And finally, the vertical land movement is not a big factor here, but places like Louisiana and Alaska, it's a big factor because we measure sea level relative to land. So those are the three additional factors that affect the regional sea level. So in terms of future sea level rise, you see these graphics on the left. We know it has been going up, what we call linearly increasing. So about 9 to 14 inches per 100 years. You might think it's a very small amount, but places like Florida, where the elevation, the topographic elevation is pretty low, that's a big deal. The bigger concern is that this is going to go up because of those factors I mentioned in the previous slide. It's going to accelerate at a higher than linear rate or quadratic rate or non-linearly. And in this region, we have what is known as a regional climate compact. About 10 years ago, we got together and said we decided we need to have what we call a unified sea level rise projection. You see this graphic, I'm not going to go through all the details, but you see we came up with some scenarios because of the uncertainty in the ice sheet melting that we cannot predict it exactly. We had to come up with some scenarios for planning. And for that planning purpose, depending on your project, you these little symbols up on top, depending on your project, you want to select a particular scenario. By 2070, relative to 2000, you have about 21 to 40 inches or higher. So depending on your risk tolerance for a particular project, you pick a particular scenario. So that's kind of what is to be expected. It's going to go at a higher rate, and we need to plan for it when we look at infrastructure for flooding and other projects. So this graphic is something I use quite frequently. This little video I took in Miami Beach a few years ago called Sunny Day Flooding. We're already seeing impacts of recurrent flooding due to rising sea level, what we call high tide flooding. And the other thing on the bottom is like, the kind of rock or geology we have, what we call Swiss cheese, and the saltwater intrusion. But more importantly, in the center, you see our water management infrastructure. In our area, we have what we call a tiered system. We have, a neighborhood, in the middle, what we call the tertiary system, and we discharge flood waters to the secondary canals, which eventually take it down to a primary canal, typically managed by the water management district. So this is the best thing to look at. This is like a highway system. You go from rural roads to the city roads to a major highways, and any blockage along the way will basically cause flooding somewhere. It could happen anywhere in the system itself. And you see on the left-hand side all the threats of future climate change, and that is a big concern. We are already seeing the type of impact you see. Let me see. Okay, you see all these graphics, whoever thought that the Fort Lauderdale airport would be flooded, Key Largo would have 60 or 50 to 60 days of tidal flooding alone, and all these other impacts like the septic tank, problems with septic tanks and others. So when you look at this, things are changing, and I always remember this quote in, I guess we said, it's Toto, I have a feeling we are not in Kansas anymore, but I feel like we are not in Florida anymore when you see all these increasing events of hazards we are seeing. So this is an animation that explains what happens to that primary canal that discharges to the ocean. You have these control structures. If you drive along A1A, you look at to the right side or left side on the road, you see these structures. Basically, they have gates typically that are closed to prevent saltwater intrusion, or they are open when there is a rain event to let the floodwaters out. Under current climate or previous climate, they work very well. They are designed to let the floodwaters out. The canal will have more water, but there won't be any flooding in the neighborhood. What happens is with the higher sea level rise, this ocean side is higher than the land side, and the gates cannot be opened, and then there will be flooding. So it's important to know that these primary canals need to maintain that capacity. And the other one is you see the saltwater intrusion front coming and contaminating wellfield. And one other thing that's happening in this is that the groundwater level, as you can see on the left-hand side here, we are already seeing evidence that the groundwater levels are going up. Basically, the rising seas will push the water table up, and below your house or land where you live in, it's only a few feet below the ground, and it's been going up. And it is like the sponge that's available for us to absorb the rainwater, and that can play a big role in flooding. And I will show you some example in a minute. And we have done some modeling at FIU to show by 2070 how much this water table would go up. So in terms of planning for flood control, you need to think about that groundwater as well. So going into flooding concepts, this concept of flood frequency or level of service that you have for your flood protection. And basically the concept of this 100-year flood, and typically many refer to as a 1% chance flood. And I have this cross section here. You have like several houses here. Let's say your house pad elevation is defined for 1% flood. And believe it or not, you have a 26% of a chance of flooding or exceed in any given year in a 30-year period, which is typically a mortgage. I see I'm running short of time very quickly, but the roads which may be designed for 10% chance flood or 10-year flood will have a very high risk in the 15-year design life. But there are threat multipliers. One is sea level rise. The other one is increasing heavy rainfall potentially, and the rising groundwater. I call these threat multipliers, which will change this flood risk. And finally, I have this. I will take only a minute to explain this. And you may remember this end of May, we had this flooding in the northern part of the Miami-Dade County. You had a big, tropical system. And I see these pictures on Twitter. And when you really, look at the data, you see this on the lower right-hand side, some data on rainfall, which are shown in blue bars. And the red dotted line is the groundwater level. So you had some rain, between May 14th and May 20th. And you can see the groundwater table went up almost by 2 feet. So when that big 3-day event came towards the end of the month, the groundwater was already high. That means there is not enough space between the ground surface and the water table to absorb that extra rain. So that is a big factor in addressing flooding or causing flooding like what you're seeing on the left-hand side. And finally, these are my take-home messages. Sea level rise is due to both global and regional factors. We also know that it's accelerating. Flood risk depends on your location, protection measures, and environmental factors. And climate change is a threat multiplier. Sea level rise, increasing rainfall. For example, when you talk about rainfall in terms of feet, that means something is changing, not in inches, and rising groundwater level. And with that, I will stop.
Thank you, Dr. Irving. Okay, let's go into what our segment on what do citizens need to know. This is nuggets from our flood management expert. So let's go to Vince. Vince, could we have your 5-minute version on what citizens need to know? Is Vince on mute? You're on mute, man.
On.
There we go.
All right. How about now?
Yeah.
We could do this? All right. First, don't vilify the code officials. We try to maintain uniformity. This is who I am. I work with Miami-Dade County. I'm a senior code officer, and I'm here to provide uniformity in the building code and how we interpret it. Why do we have a building code? Like I said, for uniformity and to protect the health and safety and welfare of our citizens, reduce property damage and loss. The oldest code comes from Mesopotamia before Christ. It was Hammurabi's code. And the first building code locally was actually by Miami Beach back in 1926 after a terrible hurricane that wiped out most of the city. And there's an underlying theme repeating. In 1937, the city of Miami adopted a code, and it was also reactive. So again and again, we had Hurricane Andrew and the South Florida Building Code tighten its belt again. And we got stricter and stricter to the point that right now, for a wind-based code, Miami-Dade County and the state of Florida with the high velocity provisions, we have the strongest wind code, all right? Because in the state of Florida, there were several regions, the South Florida Building Code, the Unified Building Code, the Standard Building Code, the governor and the powers that be got together and said, listen, we're one state, we need one code. And that's when the Florida Building Code came out. It started the process in 1998 and finally hit the shelves, so to speak, in 2002. That has taken many evolutions, and this is what the current code that we live under looks like. It's the 2017 Florida Building Code. It's updated every 3 years. And our standards are developed by the American Society of Civil Engineers. Specific flood provisions come from ASCE 24. Okay, there is a new code coming at the end of December, or Happy New Year. We'll have a 2020 code, and every 3 years we update. These are some current things that I want citizens and the public to be aware of. The new code requires something called freeboard. And if you're a fisherman or a boater, that's the height above water that you need. There are also some common terms that you're going to hear about, like BFE, that's base flood elevation. That's the height in relation to the flood risk determined by FEMA. They develop our flood insurance rate maps, and those are risk-based maps. So if you're in a really risky area, your flood zone will reflect that. And I want to go forward and show you these are the people that helped develop our code. Like I said, ASCE, the American Society of Civil Engineers, the International Code Council, FEMA, ISO, and other technologies and industries contributing to our code to develop that minimum standard to provide, again, the life, safety, and welfare of our citizens. Here are some of those terms that I was talking to you about before. BFE, coastal lay zone is relatively a new concept. We also talk a lot about elevation certificates, and as residents of Florida, you should be very familiar with an elevation certificate because one, it'll identify your height in relation to base flood elevation, and in so doing, determine your risk for flooding as far as the flood insurance rate maps are concerned. That's where most of your insurance policies will be adjusted to, and folks like myself and Mr. Pizzillo, that's what we regulate based off of, that that base flood elevation and the required freeboard in the building code or a local ordinance. Okay, these are the flood zones that I was talking about. The V zone, here in this graphic, you see it closer to the beach because that's where we expect most wave height or velocity to occur. And that's wave heights up to 3 feet. Now, as those wave heights go down, the damage should recede slightly, but there's still a good risk for scoured erosion. And that's where the new coastal A zone designation has come up. So wherever we have wave action between 3 feet and 1.5 feet, we now refer to that as the coastal A zone. And then beyond that 1.5 feet, so from 1.5 foot to 0 feet, but you're still in a flood zone, we call that a zone A. And then once you're sort of, or technically out of that hazard, you're in the X zone. Now, a lot of people make the assumption that, well, I'm in the X zone, I don't need flood insurance, and I'm safe from flooding. Again, this is a flood risk assessment. Sadly, water doesn't know how to read a map. So when it rains, it goes where it wants to go. And that will be the lowest point. So you could be on the side of a hill, but guess what? You flattened your land to build your house. Where's the water first going to hit? Where your house is. So that is why we have these zones, to show the risks. Okay. This is what a flood insurance rate map looks like. There's a lot of different areas, but I want to highlight the highest velocities are here in the middle. And as you feather out and ultimately come to the X zone, you'll see the picture, and there's no hashing or dots or anything of that nature. That is the safest calculated area of risk. Okay. This is a beach area, a coastal area. You'll see the further out this way you go, there's more velocity. And as you come inland this way, this is Old Dixie Highway or US 1, it's drier. Guess why they put Old Dixie there or US 1? It was the highest natural grade. It just made sense to stay on top of the rock. Everything east of that tends to do what? Go down.
Vince,
Yes.
got to move to the next speaker.
All right. Well, one last thing is you could find all this information on the state's website for the Florida Division of Emergency Management. There's a quick guide there available for everybody. Miami-Dade County also supports a look up your address and find your flood zone website. And FEMA also has fermets that are available. And the same thing, you type in your address and it'll show you your flood risk and map it for you. That's called a fermet. And that's all I got.
Cool. Thank you.
Yep.
Let's go to Steve Pizzillo, the Director of the Building Department and Floodplain Manager with the City of North Miami.
I'm going to take a slightly different look at this the way Vince did. I'm a regulatory agent. I deal with this every day with people at my counter. But before I get into the City of North Miami, I do want to bring up one key factor that people tend to not understand. Very few people actually understand floodplains and flood zones, you know, that are not involved in it all the time. There was a little storm called Katrina. God, it must be 15 years ago. And one of my assignments was I was deployed to Ocean Springs, Mississippi, to do damage assessment, and I got there on day 3 after the storm. Prior to that storm hitting, there was one parcel in that entire city that was in a flood zone because everything was up on a 15-foot bluff. Well, a 30-foot wave of water came in with the hurricane, and our damage assessment team from Miami-Dade County ended up condemning 1,500 houses and declaring another 1,000 unable to inhabit. So 2,500 houses in a town of under 40,000 people. So floods are real. Everything within a quarter or 3/8 of a mile of the shoreline was gone. It was just slabs all over the place with pergo flooring. I could never understand that. The pergo flooring survived the flood, but the houses themselves didn't. And one other little funny thing about that was the first satellite pass over the area, FEMA put out a statement, it looks good, the roofs are still on the houses, because they were thinking it was going to be a wind event. And when I got up there, the building official there, we were talking, and I said, you know, the roofs look fine. And he says, yeah, he says, when your house is underwater, wind has a little effect. And it was true, but in some of these houses, they actually collapsed, and all there was the roof sitting on the ground, and that's what the satellites picked up. But floodplain management is besides I enforce the building code for the city of North Miami. I'm the authority having jurisdiction. I also do flood management for the city. And every city is different in the way what they have and how they do it, because every city is different. In the case of our city, you know, when the majority of the city was built on the east end of town, you know, 50, 60 years ago, this was before floodplain maps, you know, the firms came into effect. And majority of the older housing stock is a foot to 2 feet below base flood elevation. Well, flooding is a problem, and people just don't seem to understand that. And the way the rules and regulations are written about floodplain management, you know, I have to determine when somebody is doing something called a substantial improvement. And the substantial improvement is basically majority of cities have a 50% rule that once you go over 50% of the value of the house, now you've got to bring it into provision, into compliance, which sometimes means raising the house. Unfortunately, in our area, raising these houses to 1.5 feet or 2 feet is just uneconomical, and it sometimes means that they have to demolish the house. So it's a little difficult when you're talking to your citizens that really don't understand this, and they're going to try to figure every which way they can to get around doing what you need to do. But flooding is a real problem, and flooding is here to stay. And you know, hopefully through the years, we're going to be able to get more and more into compliance with it, so that we can get to the point where we've got enough of the houses raised where it may become economically feasible to start purchasing some of the low-lying houses that probably have repetitive losses and turn them into green space. It's a never-ending battle for every city, and especially now the cities have little, if no money to spare on projects like this that may be beneficial in the future. The other thing I want to bring out is on one of Vince's slides, it talked about, it had all those organizations that are involved in floodplain management. And every 3 years, I have members of ISO, the Insurance Service Office, come into my department and rate my department on how, or rate the actual entire city on how we regulate the flood zone. And we get points for doing certain projects and doing things certain ways and doing things to a certain level. And if we do our job good, we get a good rating, and that actually affects the flood insurance premiums of everybody in the city. You know, you can get a 5, 10, 15, 20, even 30 or 40% reduction in your insurance rates if your city does a job well. Sometimes doing the job well means that 1 or 2 people are not going to like the decisions that come down, but it is for the betterment of the entire city. And it's a little hard for people to understand that, but it is something that we have to do, and something that if we do our job right, everybody in the city is benefited. It's a little difficult. And that is why, in my opinion, that is why about a dozen years ago, majority of the floodplain requirements got pushed into the building code and were more prominent in the building code. Before that, floodplain managers were, the first floodplain class I held, I had secretaries that were floodplain managers. I had Parks and Recs department people. Now you're seeing more of the regulatory people that are getting involved and are forcing the issue. And floodplain management in the last 10 to 15 years has really come into its own. Especially in Miami-Dade County, there are a lot of very professional people that are really pushing the issue, working collaboratively between the cities to make sure that everybody totally understands what we should be doing. We grab the new person that's coming in, because eventually everybody gets burned out doing floodplain management because it's so difficult, and somebody else comes in and takes it. So we all make sure that that new person, we work with them to make sure that they're doing everything right, to make sure that they're, that there's no problem, because the last thing you want to do is have FEMA come knocking on your door to do an assistance visit and start finding out that you've got major problems in your city. And unfortunately, that's why we do what we do. And unfortunately, a lot of times it gets a lot of people mad at us, but we're doing that for the betterment of everybody. And that's my view of floodplain management. And I'll turn it back over to you.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing that, Steve. Then let's go to Katie Hageman. She's with our Office of Resilience at Miami-Dade County.
Hi guys, thank you so much. If it's okay, I'll share some slides if that's doable. If it's
Yeah.
okay.
Can you release your, yeah, thanks.
Okay, and let me know, can you guys see that full screen?
Yeah.
Cool. So thanks everybody for being here. I see a lot of familiar names and that's good to see you guys all. So I work for Miami-Dade County in the Office of Resilience. And for those watching who aren't that involved, there are also regional organizations working on these issues where you can, if you want to dive in and learn more. One is the Southeast Florida Regional Climate Change Compact. And there's a link there on the slides. The other for Miami-Dade County is we have a broader resilience strategy called Resilient 305. And in there, we cover more issues than just climate change, also housing and other broader factors that contribute to community resilience. So if you want to learn more about that, I would encourage you to take a look at that strategy as it cuts across a lot of issues. In our Office of Resilience, we have a focus on climate in part. One half of our office looks at mitigation or reducing climate pollution. The team that I'm on looks at how do we prepare for the sea level rise that Obi mentioned. And of course, to do either of those things, we have to work on our communication and sharing information. So with the sea level rise component, the work in our office is focused on what do we do in the face of sea level rise. And I think flooding, as you mentioned, is real, and is a part of all coastal communities. But in Miami in particular, it's a part of our entire community because of what Obi mentioned before, where we've changed our landscape so much. So this is what the area that is Doral and Miami International Airport, Hialeah looked like originally. This is the Brickell and downtown areas just a little over 100 years ago. And of course, they've changed so much in such a short span of time. And because of that sort of starting point, we have a flooding risk that's pervasive throughout the whole community. Of course, that applies to the beach and other places. But you can still see underneath of it is sort of like an X-ray, the high ground, which is the dark browns and reds that used to dry ground. And then we've expanded that dry ground over time to where we can develop. So these maps show that originally when European settlers came down, the urbanized areas were limited just to this dark black area, and the wetlands ecosystem came all the way up to the backside of the ridge and cut through the ridge in places that we call sloughs. And then over time, they were the water levels were drained and ground was filled in as ditches and other infrastructure was put in place. But we still have that imprint on our landscape, and it very much shapes our flood risk. So the first thing I would recommend for everyone is to use one of the multiple tools that's out there to understand, what is your flood risk at the place where you live? Is it a coastal place where you could see those high wave impacts and a lot of erosion? Are you in one of the sloughs that was filled in and reclaimed, or one of the places out west that was also built on fill? To understand if you're talking about, we almost all of us have some level of flood risk, but for your house, are you talking about maybe a foot or two or more than 5 feet? And that will really inform your plan for a hurricane and what you plan to do long-term as well with your house. So this is the pattern of the landscape, and you see it as we look at some of these tools that show us where the sea level rise risk is moving forward. We still see those low-lying sloughs that cut through the neighborhoods. And I should also mention that the way that we developed over time was also very much shaped by certain housing policies like redlining, which limited where certain groups like African Americans were allowed to live. And that contributes to the broader inequalities, but also the vulnerability that we have with some of our communities on the highest ground now kind of finding themselves in a different position now that we have sea level rise and climate change on the radar of so many. And that's affecting it's part of the many factors affecting housing affordability throughout our community. And so as OB already reviewed, we have water on all sides, and seawalls have a limited efficacy because of our limestone. But we see the king tides, and we see that the changes are happening, and we know that there's more to come with about 2 feet in the next 40 years. So how do we, from this starting point, accommodate another 2 feet of water? So in our office, when we think about sea level rise, we've been talking about sort of 5 broad approaches. One is build on fill, which is what we've done for a long time in Florida. And Tiffany, if that's the time, I'll go fast and just go over these 5. And others can look at this longer term, but that's kind of what Miami Beach is doing. And we have these borrow pits out west where the lake belt where we borrow the material from. Another approach is to build more like the Florida Keys, to accept the water but build above it so that we're safe. Like the Perez Museum, for example, is a good example of how we kind of build for that water. Another approach is, as mentioned, is to look at how do we make more space for parks and water. So having more green space and more space for our canals, but that also might mean moving some houses. And in Miami-Dade County, we have a grant right now to buy 10 homes that were very flooded during Hurricane Irma and turn them into green space. Another approach is, we have a lot of examples of these greenways and blueways that provide a buffer from storms, but also provide recreation and open space for us in between storms. The other approach is to try and remove pavement and try and create greener and bluer neighborhoods that'll hold water and help us so that we don't have as much storm water. And that can be with trees, but it can also be with intentional designs like this one in Coral Gables from the Lola office, that the whole streetscape is designed to hold 8 inches of water, which is like akin to what we got in Memorial Day. And then another approach is to look at how do we develop in the future, and in some cases building around transit on high ground is one option that we have to kind of limit the impact. So for those who want to learn more, we also have a story map on our website which you can check out. So thanks for that. Sorry I went long.
That's okay. Thank you, Katie. Okay, thanks so much, everyone. So we'll just do a quick what can citizens do? It'll be a fire round of one thing that citizens can do in order to reduce their flood risk, educate themselves, whatever you think is the most important thing to share. So Vince, what can citizens do?
Wrong mute button. One thing that I would recommend everybody do is get an elevation certificate, see your flood risk, and secure flood insurance now. There is something involved or included in flood insurance called the increased cost of compliance. The maximum a flood insurance policy covers that's subsidized by the government is $30,000. And if you suffer a flood event, that increased cost of compliance is a coverage that would help you elevate or demolish the house, like Steve was alluding to before, when they do a substantial improvement, substantial damage determination. And not only that, but you also lock in your rate and keep it from just skyrocketing over time. Once you lock in your rate and it does go up, let's say your risk increases, which from all the studies it will be increasing, and the recent data we've seen on the preliminary maps or the work maps that FEMA has issued, you tie into that rate and it will only increment at 15% a year instead of getting punched in the nose with an extra $2,000 bill. It's something to help you mitigate and afford that increase in flood insurance. But an elevation certificate is generally the first step just to identify exactly where your finished floor is, okay, and where you are in the flood zone. And you could find that flood zone area, like I said, for free on a FEMA format or the Miami-Dade County. Look up flood maps. When you go to the website, just go flood maps and it'll show you a link. You click and you type in your address and that'll take you to where you need to see how far away from a flood zone you are or if you're in the middle of one.
Cool. Thanks, Vince. Steve, what can citizens do?
I'm just going to go on what Vince said too, because if you go into Miami-Dade or if you go into FEMA and you pull up your property and you say, oh, great, my house is in one floodplain, but there's another floodplain that cuts across the corner of my lot. Maybe yes, maybe no. If it's close, get an elevation certificate, get it on paper. But the one thing that citizens can do is listen to their floodplain manager, listen to their code official. There's reasons why we do this. We don't do this just because we want to be mean. We're looking out for the betterment of the entire community. And sometimes, like I said before, it is difficult, but they're you know, and people every day try to pull the wool over our eyes. And it's like, yeah, you're not the first one today to try. So, yeah, we're not.
Like we need to support our local floodplain managers. Right?
Yes, you do. It is a more difficult job being a floodplain manager than it is being a building official, because people just don't they always say, oh, well, you're the code official, so you're just doing this because you like doing this. Well, no, I'm not mean. I'm just enforcing the code.
Right.
People, my house has been here I've been living in my house for 50 years. It's never flooded. Well, it's based on 100 years. So yeah, there's a good possibility your house will still flood. That's why we enforce what we enforce.
Right. Thanks, Steve. Katie, what can citizens do?
I'd say the same thing, that you should look up how deep the water could be at your place, right? So we're in hurricane season now, and it's really important to know, are you in a place like the Burger King headquarters where you could get a huge amount of storm surge, or are you a place that's more protected? Because that'll make a huge difference. And then if you are a property owner who wants to make changes to your property, there are a lot of resources that we could point you to if you want to think about how to reduce runoff or reduce the flood risk to your individual property. There are a bunch of resources out there for folks like that.
Great. Thank you. Obi, would you like to add
Yeah,
anything?
I'll make it quick. I think the most important thing is to understand that your flood risk is changing. There are threat multipliers. So when you plan for the future, plan for future conditions, not for the current condition, although your code might only require that. So understand your flood risk are going to increase with time due to those reasons I explained.
Great. Thank you so much. Okay, we're going to go to a quick poll to assess what we learned today. Who's doing that?
Awesome. I can go ahead and get us started. Yep.
Okay, go.
So let's go ahead and take a look at poll number 2. I'm about to launch it. And so the first question you should be seeing on your screen is, what causes global average sea level to rise? This is a multiple choice question. So select the ones that seem right to you. Again, there's no right or wrong answer. We just want to see where we are.
No, there is a right answer. Yeah.
Well, we won't be splitting.
Keep going, Maddie.
So we have 4 select answer choices here. You want to scroll down and you'll be able to see 5 of the questions. So the second question you should be seeing on your screen right now is, the rate of rising sea level in the vicinity of Miami-Dade is different from the global average. Why is that? Multiple choice answer. You have a couple of minutes to answer this, so take your time. I hope everyone's able to see the poll. Great. Yeah, I see some responses coming in.
Okay, next question.
So we have number 3. Flooding in coastal areas of Miami-Dade County may be caused by blocked local drainage, inability of canals to discharge local flood waters, rising groundwater levels, rising sea levels, excessive rainfall, or all of the above. Number 4, what are the flooding threat multipliers? Is it sea level rise, increasing rainfall, rising groundwater levels, or all the above? And number 5, what is a 100-year flood? A flood that happens exactly every 100 years, a flood that has a 1% chance of occurrence every year, or a flood that occurs on the average every 100 years. Let us know what you think. We have 1 more minute for this poll, and I'll share some of the results with you. All right, 91% of you answered. Thank you so much for participating. So let me share the results. All right, so for the first question, what causes global average sea levels to rise? Yes, all of the above. That's 95% of you, so that's great. The rate of rising sea level in the vicinity of Miami-Dade is different from the global average. Why is that? Well, redistribution of land-based ice caused Earth's gravitational field to change, changing ocean currents such as the Gulf Stream. So yes, all of the above. And flooding in coastal areas of Miami-Dade County may be caused by all of the above. So blocked local drainage, inability of canals to discharge local floodwaters, rising groundwater levels, rising sea level, and excessive rainfall. And what are the flood threats multiplier? Well, all of the above. We have sea level rise, increasing rainfall, rising groundwater levels. And the last question was, what is 100-year flood? That is a flood that has a 1% chance of occurrence every year. So thanks again for those who participated.
Oh, great. Susan is.
Oh my gosh.
Oh, you're back. Yay.
I am so sorry. My internet went down. It just went down. Okay. So am I still allowed to share my screen here?
Yeah, so this is Dr. Susan Jacobson, and she's going to talk to you about Eyes on the Rise and citizen science flood reporting application that she prepared. And she's going to tell you a little bit about an event coming up so that you can help us collect information about flooding around town.
Yes, indeed. Thank you so much, Tiffany. Yes, my name is Susan Jacobson. There we go. Oh, ha ha. I reloaded everything and then it kicked me off the system. All right, my name is Susan Jacobson. Let me just arrange my screen here for just a moment. I had set all this up before. I'm an associate professor in the Department of Journalism and Media at Florida International University. So what I'm going to talk to you about today is something that you can do to help at least document sea level rise in your neighborhoods. So for the past few years, the Sea Level Solutions Center, the Institute of the Environment, and the Department of Journalism have all held these citizen science sea level solutions days during the times of the king tides, which is the highest high tides of the year. And so over here on the left, you're going to see a mock-up of our little phone application for CLIA. There's a Q screen, and I'm going to give you a minute to do that while I talk through a couple of other applications that we have that sort of show why we're
So I think might have lost Susan, but I know what she was trying to tell us was if you let me share my screen maybe until we hopefully get her back. All right, let me see if I can share my screen over here. She can join us in a minute. All right, so Dr. Jacobson wanted pretty much to show us her mobile app for Sea Level Solutions Day. Maybe Tiffany, you want to talk a little bit about that. But if you use your smartphone application and you go into the camera, like if you were about to take a picture, you can scan that QR code and it's going to prompt you to a link at the top of your iPhone or cell phone. And then once you click on that, you're going to be able to see our mobile application. Or if you're on your computer and don't have your smartphone on you at the moment, then you can type the website below, which is https, and then all the way to miamistories.net/sea level solutions day, well, SLSD/2020.
Okay, great. And if you could paste that in the chat, that would be fantastic. I would really appreciate that. So I'm going to whip right through this. So what we discovered when we were when we started working on this is we helped create this working with the Institute of the Environment and the FIU GIS Center. We created what's called an interactive sea level rise viewer. And you can get to it, and I'm going to share my screen for a moment. She said share. Okay, you can get to it at eyesontherise.org/app, and we'll put that in the chat. And what it does is it lets you enter your address. So here I entered the Biscayne Bay campus at FIU. And then the second tab, you can slide over to see the impact of up to 6 feet of sea level rise. Normally I would have done this in real time, but we just didn't have enough time. The
Without
next thing,
intervention.
pardon?
Remember, without adaptation. without interventions?
Without intervention, that is correct. So this is what could happen with 6 feet of sea level rise without adaptation, without changing our habits or changing parts of the infrastructure, like Katie covered a lot of wonderful options there. I'm going to show you one other thing that you can look at, which is the high tide calendar. Okay, there it is. Same idea here. You enter your address. I'll enter the BBC campus of FIU. Okay, and what it does is it takes your location and it maps you to the nearest tide station. And then it shows you a map of the highest high tides. So the map where the date is blue, that means that both the morning and the evening tides are above 2.5 feet. Not every place in South Florida is going to flood when there's highest high tides. It depends on your location, right? Your elevation. But if you do live inside of a place where it floods during the high tides, this calendar will give you a heads up. And what we're going to do on the 17th and 18th of October, on the 17th in the morning, which is a Saturday, we're going to gather together some citizen scientists. We're going to give you some kits. We're going to ask you to go out and take measurements of any potential flooding due to the high tides. And we're going to have a little webinar to train you how to do this. But, and this is why I kept this window open, the main application for entering data is here. So I'm going to very quickly walk you through this. And basically what we're going to ask you to do, you can bring this up on your phone. Oh, my connection is unstable. Enter your data. You'll be able to enter your location. One of the things that it might do is it might ask you if it's okay for this application to give you your location. You're going to say yes. You're going to take a yardstick and measure the water depth in inches. You're going to take a picture of your yardstick in the water so we can tell how deep the water is. This is a method of verification of the data that was entered. We're going to give you something called a refractometer that measures the salinity. We're going to give you some water bottles to collect some samples. We're going to ask you to take pictures of all these things because just for our documentation. You can describe the standing water. We're going to ask you to give us a close-up of the flood, show us where it's coming from, context or a long shot, show us what it's impacting. Is it on a street? Is it at public transit? You can do a video, add some field notes, and when you're done, don't forget to hit the submit button, which is down at the bottom. And then we'll get the data, and we have maps of this data from previous years that we have done. This, and I'm totally running out of time. So we really hope that you can join us. The last slide I'm going to show you is the one on our MISON website, and this is at miamistories.net/takeaction. And it's where we're going to ask you to, if you're interested in signing up, please sign up for the Sea Level Solutions Day here. We will be taking volunteers out on Saturday, October 17th from 9 a.m. to 12 p.m. And I'm going to stop sharing, and I will paste in the chat room the link to the sign-up sheet. Thank you, everybody.
Great job, Susan. Okay, satisfaction survey.
Awesome. So we're going to do one last survey, and this is a satisfaction survey. So here it is. How would you rate today's webinar? Let us know. Would you like to give us a high five? There were some aspects I really liked, but not everything. It was okay. Could have been better. Terrible. And a waste of my time. I don't know or prefer not to answer. You should see 3 questions here. Would you also like to participate in our citizen science monitoring event? We hope so. That's the one that Dr. Susan was talking about. And do you plan to try to implement one of the activities you learned about today and report it using a smartphone or other device? Thank you for those who are answering.
Well, I'd just like to, while we finish up with the poll, I'd like to thank our panelists today. Fantastic presentations by our local floodplain managers and resilience program managers and scientists. It's really been a tremendous panel. And so much more to talk about. Sorry we could not get to your questions today, but you can reach out to any of us, or maybe we can have a follow-up at another time. We really appreciate your interest. And here, yes, sign up to participate in upcoming citizen science events. And you can use this QR code to bring that right up on your phone. And good, Maya.
I also put it in the chat.
Okay, super. Thank you.
All right, and with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and end the poll and share some of the results with you.
And we welcome your feedback, so please send us an email, and we'd love to hear from you. Have a great week, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye. Thanks,
Have a good one.
Maria. Thanks,
Stay
everyone.
safe.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks. Happy birthday, baby.
Thank you.